Say, what's cracking, YouTube? It's your boy 16 to life, and I'm back like I'm on a parole violation. You're down. Now, for those of y'all that's new to my page, in 1994, I got arrested. I was eventually sentenced to 16 years to life, and I served 24 years straight in the California prison system. During those times, I accumulated some good stories, and I'm going to drop one on y'all today, man. So let's hop right up into this video. So yeah, you see the title of this video right here. Do blacks just want to go home? And once again, you know, I think that due to the fact that you have blacks who are separated, divided, and participate in entirely different functions, or excuse me, participate in entirely different factions, their obligation really only lies to whatever faction that they are aligned themselves in. So when you have other organizations who function as one, and when that includes, so functioning in an organization where it's extremely larger, when one person from that organization gets into it, then of course you're obligated to be there and support whatever is going on, as opposed to when you're functioning with a faction that may only have 7 or 8 people, may have 10, 15 people, depending on what prison you're at and what yard you're at. So then when you're functioning as a black, of course, your obligation to have the back of that individual or of that individual car that you are affiliated with is much smaller, because you're not always going to be in something, you know. And so it's crazy that people wonder that, right? Because when I would go to the law library, or when I would go to the library, a section of that library is known as the law library, where they have a lot of legal books where you could go to try to research your case, get legal knowledge, or look up legal law, case law, to file your appeals and stuff. And so every time in every single prison, when I would go to the law library, that section of the library, excuse me, would only be filled with blacks. There would be no other people in the law library trying to file an appeal and go home and stuff. It would only be blacks. Now, of course, if you believe that, you crazy as hell. You had people from every color, people from every gang, people from every race in the law library trying to appeal their sentence, trying to get time reduced, and trying to go home. So me pointing that out in itself should show you that everybody is trying to go home in prison. Like I said, I've done 24 years straight, and I've seen a whole lot of things in prison. But one thing I never saw is when a person, regardless of what color or affiliation, when they called his name and told him, hey man, it's time for parole, I never saw, or never even heard of anyone for that matter, telling them, hey, that's all right, I'm kicking it with the homies, I don't want to go home. So like I said, you know, some factions, when people are participating with them, you know, their obligation is to that faction. And so I honestly believe that when it comes down to the blacks, honestly, it depends on which individual we're talking about, right? Case in point, I was in Ironwood on C Yard. I had a homie. He had a life sentence. He didn't have a violent 3-strike. He just had a 3rd strike. Now, at some point in time, those who were convicted and given 25 years to life or a life sentence behind the 3-strike law, but the initial proposal of the 3-strike law was created, or it was intended for people who had violent crimes, but somewhere in the legislation it got mixed up or whatever, and so some type of way it started applying, or they made it to apply to everybody, not just people who had their 3rd strike was violent. And so my homie, he had got caught up on a 3rd strike, but it wasn't non-violent. So later on, they was fighting to have that law overchanged, and he really thought he had action at going home once that law was going to be voted in and changed. And eventually it was voted on, and eventually he did go home. But at this point in particular time, the law had not been changed yet. But we was on C Yard, you know, we had a real tight, solid group there. When I say we, I'm talking about the homies from IE. And so we would have, on every day, we would have it was mandatory within the way that we was functioning that we have knives on the yard in the event something jumped off. And so the way we was doing it, so everybody wouldn't be potentially at risk for getting caught with a knife each day, we had certain individuals who it would be their responsibility to have the knife on that particular day, right? So maybe one day I would have it, then the next day another homie would have it, then the next day another homie would have it, so on and so forth, right? Now this particular homie who I'm talking about, as I mentioned before, he had a life sentence, right? At least 25 years to life, maybe even more than that. But he was adamant about not carrying a knife. He said, hey man, listen, I'll ride with the homies. If something jump off, I'm gonna be there, I'm gonna fight. But he would not touch that knife. You know, he didn't want to get caught with a knife because he felt that being caught with a knife then would lengthen his time in prison. And of course, due to the fact that he was there for a non-violent third strike, he felt that he had action at eventually going home soon. Actually, this law that was going to be voted on within months. And so he thought that he would qualify and he would go home. And so like I said, he would not touch the knife. And so at this particular time, the homie Chances was on the yard, on C yard with us, you know. And so Chances asked him, well, hey homie, listen, we'll bring the knife out, homie, and we'll put the knife in a bag. Will you at least watch the bag? Yeah, homie, listen, homie. Okay, homie, can you at least watch the bag, homie? Will you please just watch the bag for us? Hey, that, you know, y'all know if y'all see my interviews with Chances, man. So yeah, that's what Chances asked him, homie. And yes, so he agreed to at least watching the bag. But he, like I said, he was adamant. So it just all depends. And then, okay, speaking of Chances, once again now, talking about Chances. I thought Chances was a lifer. The way Chances was running around, making knives, the way I'd heard of him always stabbing people, knocking people out. He knocked a couple of dudes out on the yard. One of the homies knocked him clean about his boots on the yard. Bam! Put him right to sleep, right? I just assumed Chances had life. Chances didn't care. Chances would be in there making knives and every time an incident transpired on the yard, Chances thing was, hey, homie, on the next inlock, we all gonna go in there and get our knives, homie. And then we gonna push up on the dude. And if he say the wrong thing, homie, I'm gonna blast him out his boots. That was Chance's remedy for damn near everything that we got into on the yard, right? So I just assumed that, man, this dude is crazy. This dude don't want to go home. He must have life. At that time, you know, Chances was probably about 42 years old. I was probably, I don't know, I may have been 32, 33, somewhere around there. And like I said, just by the way he carried himself and by the way he was always willing to, or he wanted to solve anything that he felt was disrespectful with knife play. So later on, we get caught up. We get in a riot, we go to the hole, and we end up becoming cellies. And so one day as we're in there talking, I asked him if he had a life sentence. He told me no, man, he didn't have a life sentence. So I couldn't understand. I'm like, damn, man, the way this dude is running around tripping and with these knives all the time. This dude was a professional knife maker, man. He stayed making knives, like I said. Anytime something happened, that was his solution. And this is what he was telling me, right? This is probably June, July, somewhere around there. Oh yeah, homie. We probably won't make it through the summer, homie. Yeah, I'm pretty sure something will jump off, homie. We probably won't make it through the summer. Basically talking about the car. We was gonna get into something on the yard and we wind up in the hole. And sure enough, we did, right? So, like I said, it just all comes down to the individual. So, that was like around in 2003, man. Maybe in about 2005, 2006, you know, I end up getting some pictures from Chances. Sure enough, Chances had got out. He had got out. He wrote me a couple of times, sent me some pictures and stuff. Because when we was in the hole, we was talking about, would be nice to have a nice Thanksgiving dinner and all this old type of stuff. So like I said, man, it all just comes down to the individual, man. I told a story about the homie, Robbie Dobs. Robbie Dobs was, he had done a bunch of time, and at this particular time of this story, he was maybe about, 2-3 weeks to the house, He was getting ready to go home. He had done a fair amount of time, maybe 9-10 years. Somebody happened to hit the yard who had pretty much dope fiended him on another yard. Robbie Dobs was from IE. He happened to be in a cell with a Crip from Compton. The Compton Crips on this other yard get into it with the Bloods. So one of the Bloods, when they get into it with the Bloods happen to push up on the cell that Robbie Dobs was in with the Compton dude. The Blood pushed up, because he's looking to get into it, I guess, with the dude from Compton or whatever. So by Robbie Dobs being in the cell with him, I guess the blood from Dago assumed that Robbie Dobs was also a Compton Crip. He ended up firing on Robbie Dobs. Robbie Dobs couldn't accept that. So when he ended up hitting the yard, like I said, Robbie Dobs was maybe about 2 weeks from the house. So he had another homie on the yard, JJ. JJ was a big old giant dude. JJ, at that time they had took the weights, but he loved to say, oh, doggy, you should have saw me 10 years ago, doggy. I was so big, doggy. I had to wipe my ass from the front, doggy. My arms were so big, doggy. I couldn't reach around from the back and wipe my ass. I had to wipe my ass from the front, doggy. We'd always be laughing like, JJ, homie, that's too much information. We not trying to hear all that motherfucking shit. JJ, like I say, I believe I told a story about him. JJ was burnt out, man. JJ had a big old giant penis tattooed on him, about a 7 or 8 inch penis tattooed on his on his back, right on the side of him. On the other side of him, he had a big old stick of dynamite. And so on one side of where he had the big old penis, it said anything I ain't fucking, and then you turned on. It said by the big old penis, it said dick and dynamite. And then he said, hey, doggy, look, doggy. Then he turned around to the side that the dynamite, and he said, it said anything I ain't fucking. Then he turned around to the dynamite and said, I'm blowing up. So JJ was burnt out, right? JJ was real big. And this is after they had took the weights. But so JJ, since the homie Robbie Dobs was short to the house, JJ offered to go in there and take the fade for him, to fight the dude. Robbie Dobs was like, no, homie, the dude dope fiend me. He fired on me. I'm going to get this dude. And the dude that had fired on Robbie Dobs was probably about 6'2", maybe 245, 250. Robbie Dobs was maybe about 5'7", 155, 60 pounds, right? He didn't care about getting into it with this dude. He didn't care about that he had a parole date in about 2 weeks, knowing that if he got into it with this dude, he would definitely get some more time, at least 3 months, maybe more, depending on how the situation turned out. And he didn't give a damn about going home, right? So I think it all just boils down to the individual, man. I had another good buddy, homie. I'm not gonna say his name, right? But he was from Broadway. I was from Ironwood. I was in Ironwood with him, and then I also wind up being at another institution with him. He had got into it. He had got into an altercation with some homies from the car that he was functioning with, or whatever. They had jumped him a couple times. I don't know what all was going on, right? And so he was my buddy, but that was an in-house beef, right? And so, I couldn't get in that, right? But he did not want a knife. He was like, man, I'm not just, because when we was together in Ironwood around 2003, he had got out, he had went home. He had came back with 6-7 years or something like that. So this is maybe, I don't know, 2014, 2015, somewhere up in there. But he did not want a knife. Now this dude was a rider. I'd seen him in Ironwood squabble a few times. He was far from a punk. Nobody would never label this dude as a punk, but he didn't want a knife. So I think once again, it just all boils down to the individual, man. I've seen many dudes getting ready to go home, black dudes, and they get into it, or their homies in a car getting ready to get into it, and they support them, right? They go out there. I've also seen many instances where dudes were short to the house, black dudes, and they homies would tell them, hey man, we fit to get into it, stay in the house, homie, go on and go home. That's one thing that I appreciated and liked about black cars. When they was getting ready to get into it, if they had a homie that was short, getting ready to go home, they say, go ahead and go home, homie. You can do more for us out there than in here, meaning that if you want to get out, try to send us a package, maybe try to send some dope back up in here, maybe try to send a girl up here to visit a couple of homies or whatever, right? So once again, man, it just all depends on the individual. Like I said, I've seen everybody, black, white, Mexican, everybody in the law library trying to overturn their cases, trying to get their cases appealed, trying to get that life sentence took off. So, when it all boils down to it, man, everybody wants to go home. But anyway, y'all already know who it is. It's your boy 16 to life. Resume normal program.